There is a pie in the plain world that carries a heavy and a tender name. We call it funeral pie. And I know that sounds strange to you, maybe even sad, but let me tell you about it. Because there is nothing sad in this pie at all. Only love, only the deep, old love of a community that shows up for its people in their darkest hour with food in its hands. Funeral pie is a raisin pie, a simple pie made of raisins, and it earned its name because it was the pie the plain women made when someone died. The pie carried to the grieving family. The pie set out to feed the hundreds who came to mourn. And I know the name may sound grim to modern ears, even morbid, but it is not to us. And I want you to understand why. To a plain person, that name is not grim at all. It is tender. It speaks of a pie that has been present at the hardest moments of a family's life, present in love, present in service, present to comfort and to feed. And the name honors the pie's holy work, which is to nourish the sorrowing. There is nothing morbid in it. There is only the plain acceptance that death is part of life, that it comes to every family in its turn, and that when it comes, we meet it the way we meet everything, together with our hands full of food and our hearts full of love. A people who are not afraid to name a pie after a funeral are a people who are not afraid of death, who have made their peace with it, who know it as a passage and not an ending. There is a deep calm in that, a deep faith, and it is baked right into this humble pie, and it earned that role for a good and practical reason that I will explain. Today, I am going to teach you to make it the real old way with the exact recipe. And I am going to tell you why this humble pie of raisins has sat at the center of our sorrows for 200 years and why making it even now, even for no funeral at all, is a way of remembering that we are made to carry one another through grief. Let me tell you first why it is a raisin pie, of all things, that became the funeral pie. Because the reason is beautiful in its plainness. When someone dies in a plain community, the whole community comes, hundreds of people, to mourn and to bury and to comfort the family. And all of them must be fed, just as at a wedding, in the midst of grief. But a death does not wait for the season. A death comes in the deep of winter, as often as the height of summer, comes when there is no fresh fruit to be had anywhere, when the gardens are under snow and the orchards are bare. And so the women needed a pie they could make at any time of year, in any season, from things kept always in the pantry. And raisins sit in the pantry all year round, needing nothing, ready always. A raisin pie could be made in January as easily as in July, made quickly, made from what was always on hand, to feed the mourners at a moment's notice. That is why it became the funeral pie. Because grief comes unannounced in every season, and this was the pie that could always be made to meet it. There is a whole plain wisdom in that, in having ready always the means to feed the sorrowing, no matter when sorrow comes. A plain pantry was always stocked against need, and the raisin pie is the sweetest proof of it, a comfort held in reserve, waiting quietly on the shelf for the day it would be needed, as it always, in time, so surely would be. So let me show you how it is made, and I will give you the amounts exactly so you can make it yourself. You will need 2 cups of raisins, good raisins, plump ones, if you have them. And you start by cooking those raisins to soften and plump them and to make the rich filling. You put your 2 cups of raisins in a saucepan with 2 cups of water, and you bring it to a boil, and then you let it simmer gently for about 5 minutes until the raisins are plump and soft and the water has taken on their dark sweetness. Some old cooks like to let the raisins soak in the water for a time before cooking, even overnight, to plump them fuller. And you may do that if you think of it ahead, but it is not needful. The simmering will plump them well enough. While your raisins simmer, you mix together the things that will thicken the filling into that lovely soft set. In a bowl, you put 1 cup of sugar, and with it, you stir 3 tablespoons of flour, or you may use 2 tablespoons of cornstarch instead for a clearer, glossier filling, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And if you like, and I do like a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon for warmth, you stir those dry things together well so the flour or cornstarch is worked all through the sugar with no lumps. And then you stir that sugar mixture right into your simmering raisins and their liquid, stirring all the while, and you keep cooking it gently, stirring until it thickens up a few minutes, until it goes from thin and watery to thick and glossy and coats the back of your spoon. When it has thickened, you take it off the heat. Now there are 2 more things that go in and they lift the whole pie. The first is a little acid to balance all that sweetness, and that is lemon. You stir in 1 tablespoon of lemon juice and a little grated lemon rind too, if you have a lemon to grate. About a teaspoon of the rind, and that brightness cuts the heavy sweetness of the raisins and makes the whole pie taste alive instead of cloying. Do not leave out the lemon. It is small, but it is the difference between a good raisin pie and a dull one. That single tablespoon of brightness lifts the whole heavy sweetness of the raisins and wakes it up, and a raisin pie without it tastes flat and one note. So however tempted you are to skip it, do not. And the second thing in many old recipes is butter, 1 tablespoon of it, stirred in at the end while the filling is still hot for richness and shine. Stir in your lemon and your butter, and your filling is made dark and glossy and thick and fragrant. And you let it cool a little while you ready your crust. This is a 2-crust pie, a pie with a bottom and a top. And though a proper crust deserves a whole lesson of its own, let me at least give you a simple one right here so you can make this pie today. For a 2-crust pie, you need 2 cups of flour and 1 teaspoon of salt stirred through it. And into that, you cut 2/3 of a cup of lard or butter, or a mix of the two, cutting it in with a fork or a pastry blender or your fingertips until the whole thing looks like coarse crumbs the size of small peas. Then you sprinkle in cold water, a tablespoon at a time, 4 to 6 tablespoons in all, tossing it gently with a fork just until the dough gathers together. And you do not overwork it, for a light hand makes a tender crust, and a heavy hand makes a tough one. You divide that dough in 2, 1 piece for the bottom and 1 for the top, and you roll each out on a floured board. Chill it a bit first if you have time. For cold pastry rolls and bakes best. That is your crust, the same plain crust that serves for any pie you will ever make. And once your hands learn it, you will never buy a crust again. You line your pie plate with the bottom crust. You pour in your raisin filling, all of it, spread even, and then you put on the top. Now you can do a plain full top crust with a few slits cut in it to let the steam out, and that is the old common way. Or You can cut your top crust into strips and lay them over in a lattice over and under, which is prettier and lets you see the dark filling through the openings. And for a funeral, where the pie was set out for all to see, the lattice was often used for even in grief, the plain women took care to make the food beautiful as an act of love. Either way, plain top or lattice, you seal the edges, crimping them together with your fingers or a fork. Then you bake it. You bake it in a hot oven, 425 degrees, for the first 15 minutes to set the crust and start it browning. And then you turn it down to 350 degrees and bake it another 25 to 30 minutes until the crust is a deep golden brown. And you can see the filling bubbling thick at the slits or through the lattice. And then, as with all pies, you must let it cool all the way before you cut it so the filling can set up firm and slice clean instead of running out soft. A cooled raisin pie cuts into neat dark slices. The raisins set in their glossy spiced filling, and it is sweeter and richer and more comforting than you would ever expect a humble raisin pie to be. Now let me give you a few variations, because over 200 years, the plain woman found many ways to make this pie their own. Some like to add nuts, a half cup of chopped walnuts stirred into the filling before it goes in the crust, and the nuts give a lovely texture against the soft raisins, and this nutted version is a favorite in many families. Some brighten it further with orange in place of or alongside the lemon, the juice, and a little grated rind of an orange stirred in, which pairs beautifully with the raisins. And there is a richer cousin of this pie, the sour cream raisin pie, where you stir a cup of sour cream into the filling, which makes it creamy and custard-like and even more comforting, though it must then be kept cool. My grandmother made the plain lemon Brighton version most often, for it was the truest funeral pie and the one everyone expected, but she made the nutted one for special and the sour cream one, now and again for a treat. You may find your own favorite among them. They are all built on the same foundation, the plumped raisins and the sweet thickened filling, and once you have made the plain one, you can wander among the variations as you please. Let me tell you what this pie is, beyond its ingredients, because this is a pie that means something. When a death came to our community, the women did not ask whether to help. They simply began to cook. And the funeral pies would appear, carried from kitchen to the grieving home, dozens of them, dark and glossy in their crusts, to feed the family who could not think to cook for themselves in their sorrow, and to feed the great crowd of mourners who would come. It was a way of saying, without words, we are here, we have you, you do not have to think about anything but your grief, we will handle the rest. And there is such tenderness in that, such deep old love. In the modern world, when someone dies, so often people do not know what to do. They feel helpless, they send a card and stay away because they do not know what to say. But the plain people always knew what to do. You cook, you bring food, you show up with a pie in your hands, and you do not need to have the right words because the pie says it for you. It says, I am so sorry, and I love you, and you are not alone, and here is something warm and good in the middle of your darkness. Food is how we love people when words fail, and words always fail in the face of death. And so we bring the pie, and the pie was never alone, of course. When a death comes to a plain community, the whole machinery of care that I have told you about, the same that feeds a wedding, turns itself now to feeding the grieving and the mourners. A funeral in the plain world draws hundreds, just as a wedding does, and they must all be fed, and so the women cook, and the food comes from every household. There is a great funeral dinner after the burial, and it is hearty plain food for grief and cold. Graveside standing make people hungry whether they feel it or not. There is often stewed chicken and mashed potatoes and the bread and butter and the cooked vegetables, and always, always the funeral pies set out at the end, the dark raisin pies made by a dozen hands. In some communities, there are particular dishes tied to funerals, just as the roast is tied to weddings, foods that appear at no other time, so that the very taste of them calls up the solemn, tender feeling of a burial day. And through it all, the bereaved family is fed and tended and never once left to fend for themselves, held up entirely by the hands of the community from the moment of the death through the burial and for days and weeks after, as the casseroles and the pies keep coming to their door. That is how the plain people grieve together, fed, never alone. Let me go on, because there is more to say about what this pie has meant to me. I have carried funeral pies to grieving homes more times than I can count, and I have received them too in my own hours of grief. And I will tell you that there is a comfort in that dark, sweet pie that goes far beyond the taste of it. When my own mother died, that hard winter I have told you about, the pies came. The women of the community came with their funeral pies and their other food, and they filled my kitchen and they fed my family, and they let me grieve without having to think about a single practical thing. And every one of those pies was a hand on my shoulder, a voice saying, "You are held, you are loved, we are here. I will never forget it as long as I live." That is what this pie is. It is love you can hold in your two hands and carry to someone who is hurting. It is the plain community's ancient answer to death, which is not to look away, but to draw close and to feed and to stay. So while I hope you have no funeral to bake for, I want you to make this pie, and I want you to remember what it means. And more than that, I want you to remember the lesson of it, which is this. When grief comes to someone you know, do not stay away because you do not know what to say. There is nothing to say. There are no words that fix death, but there is something to do. You can cook, you can bring food, you can show up on the doorstep with something warm in your hands and simply say, "I brought you supper. I am so sorry. I am here." That is worth more than any words. And it is a thing anyone can do. And it is a thing the plain people have never stopped doing. And it is perhaps the most important thing this humble raisin pie has to teach the whole hurried, awkward, well-meaning modern world. When someone is grieving, go to them and bring food. Do not send a card and stay home. Bake a pie and go. If you would like this recipe written out and every other recipe I know, all the pies for joy and the pies for sorrow and everything in between, they are gathered together in my kitchen field book, waiting for you just below this video. 100 recipes from Lancaster County, going all the way back to 1720, written down the way I would tell them to you if you were sitting right here at my table. And if you are new to my kitchen, come and sit with me a while. I share these old ways every few days, the food that has carried plain families through every season of life, the glad and the grieving both, for 200 years and more. Subscribe, and we will bake through the whole of life together There is always room at my table for one more. Until next time, God bless your hands, God bless your kitchen, and God bless every soul who gathers at your table.